You think you know the most expensive mushroom in the world. You don't. If you said truffles, you're wrong. There's a fungus that makes white truffle look like a grocery store button mushroom, and most people who've eaten it had no idea what they were eating or what it cost. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what it is and why almost no one does. This is the story of the rarest organism on Earth that humans eat, and why the people who control access to it want it to stay a secret. Stick with me, because the answer isn't what you expect, and the reason it costs what it costs is genuinely concerning. For most people, truffle is the ceiling. It's the word that ends the sentence when someone asks, "What's the most expensive thing you can eat?" White Alba truffle, Northern Italy. A few weeks a year, if the season cooperates. Around $3,000 to $5,000 a pound when the harvest is good, more when it isn't. In 2021, a single truffle weighing just over 2 pounds sold at auction for $120,000. That's the story most people know. It's a real story. It's just not the whole story, because there's a mushroom that has sold in quiet, regular transactions for more per pound than that, for generations. And almost no one outside of a very specific part of the world knows it exists. The mushroom, or more precisely, the fungus, is called Ophiocordyceps sinensis. In Tibet, they call it yartsa gunbu, translated summer grass, winter worm. And that name tells you everything. It's a parasitic fungus that invades the body of a ghost moth caterpillar, consumes it from the inside out over the winter, and emerges from the ground in spring as a thin brown stalk poking through the snow. The caterpillar is mummified inside. The fungus has replaced it entirely. Harvesters, mostly Tibetan and Nepalese villagers, crawl across high-altitude grasslands on their hands and knees, scanning for that tiny stalk. They may cover a mile of terrain and find a handful. At peak market price, a single kilogram has sold for over $63,000. That's not a typo. And it's not an outlier. Here's where it gets strange. Truffles are expensive partly because they're difficult to cultivate, but they can be cultivated. There are truffle farms. The supply can be managed. Yartsa gunbu cannot be farmed, not for lack of trying. Scientists have attempted to replicate the life cycle in controlled environments for decades. They can culture the fungus in a lab. They cannot get it to successfully infect and mummify the ghost moth larva at scale. The relationship between fungus, caterpillar, altitude, soil temperature, and microbiome is so specific, so finely tuned over millions of years, that no one has cracked it. Every gram sold comes from a human being on their knees on a Himalayan hillside. That's the supply chain. There is no other. And the demand side? That's where the story gets even more interesting. In traditional Chinese medicine, yartsa gunbu has been used for over 1,000 years. Stamina, kidney function, respiratory health, sexual vitality. The texts describe it as a tonic that bridges yin and yang, something that works whether you're depleted or looking to build. For centuries, it was reserved for emperors. Not metaphorically, literally, commoners weren't permitted to consume it. Then, in 1993, 3 female Chinese runners broke multiple world records at the National Games in Beijing. Their coach attributed it, at least in part, to a training regimen that included yartsa gunbu in their diet. The story went global. Demand spiked. Since then, as China's middle class has expanded, as wealth has moved into a segment of the population that still values traditional medicine, deeply demand has climbed every year. Meanwhile, supply has stayed essentially flat, or declined, because the glaciers are retreating. The ghost moth caterpillar needs a very specific elevation band. Too low, wrong temperature. Too high, wrong soil. The fungus infects at a precise window in the larval cycle, in a precise range of conditions that exists only in a narrow strip of the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas. As temperatures rise, that band shifts upward. The meadows follow. But there's a ceiling, there's only so much mountain. And research, published in the last decade, has shown harvest volumes in some regions declining by as much as 30 to 50% from their peak. The communities that harvest it, communities where yartsa gunbu can represent 50 to 80% of annual household income, are watching the season shorten year by year. So, you have a product that can't be synthesized, a supply that's actively shrinking, a market of over 1 billion people that has been told for 1,000 years that this thing is irreplaceable, and no alternative. The price isn't going down. What you're watching in real time is the slow disappearance of the world's most expensive organism, and most people don't even know the name of it. So what does it taste like? The answer is surprisingly subtle. Earthy, slightly sweet, umami without aggression. Some describe a faint grassiness, something mineral underneath. It's not a flavor that announces itself, which is part of why people who've had it in broths, in soups, in teas often don't realize what they're eating. The experience isn't in the taste, it's in what it represents, what it costs, what it means inside a particular tradition. Most Westerners who've encountered it had it in a high-end restaurant in Hong Kong or Chengdu, embedded in a dish unannounced. They might have paid $300 for that plate without knowing a single gram of their meal was worth more than their bottle of wine. If you made it this far, you now know something that most people who eat at 3-star restaurants don't. If you've ever tried yartsagunbu in any form, in any dish, drop it in the comments. I want to know what you paid, what you thought, and whether you think the price makes any sense. And if you want to keep going down this fungi tour, the next video is about the fungus that eats plastic and could potentially help clean our planet. You'll want to stay tuned for that one. Subscribe if you're new. The algorithm won't show you the next one unless you tell it to.